This just doesn't make sense. This just doesn't make sense. Think about it. Think about it. Just think about it. 1974. This is a billion-dollar industry. Why did it take so long? 1974.
Does a 17 hit?
It just doesn't make sense.
What?
Why did it take until 1974 to invent D&D? The answer to this, what seems like a very simple question, genuinely terrifies me. I can't stop thinking about it, and now I just have to tell you. And I'm sorry that it might do the exact same thing to you too. This is the D&D problem, and the terrifying reason it took thousands of years to invent D&D.
Who are you talking to?
And where do all these lights come from?
So let's have a look. What do you actually need to make and invent D&D? What technologies do you need in place for D&D to be possible? At its very basic level, D&D is a storytelling game. It's about people pretending to be characters, whether they be heroes or villains. They're going on quests, they're trying to find treasure or loot, and they're trying to improve themselves to become something bigger than they were before. How long have we had storytelling for? I mean, easily as long as the entirety of human history. But let's actually look for D&D style stories. How far back can we find those? Let's look at the earliest recorded story we have.
The Epic of Gilgamesh.
Gilgamesh and his wrestling friend Enkidu both go on a quest together to kill a giant ogre demon kind of creature named Humbaba the Terrible, which does sound like a made-up name for D&D, but anyway, they kill the guardian, chop down a sacred tree, and a goddess, so impressed with this, tries to sleep with Gilgamesh. He refuses. Because of his refusal, his friend Enkidu ends up dying, being killed by the Bull of Heaven, which is sent in vengeance of the goddess's rejection. The second half of the story is Gilgamesh, emotionally damaged from the loss of his friend, hunting for the secret of eternal life. This seems pretty D&D. So when's this from? We've had D&D-like stories for at least 4,000 years. 4,000 years. All right, maybe organized religion stopped this stuff so it just doesn't happen later. Like, oh, here's a story from Catholic England recorded in around 700 AD. What's it called? Beowulf is hired by a king to kill the monster Grendel. He kills the monster, then finds some loot, a giant sword, which he then uses to kill Grendel's mother. In reward for his victory, Beowulf is crowned king, only to find his new kingdom under the threat of, you guessed it, a dragon. So, yeah. Religion didn't stop people telling these stories, and the church couldn't stop them either. So storytelling, check. We've had D&D-like narratives for at least 4,000 years. What about the physical aspects of D&D? Not just the mental storytelling part, but what about the physical aspects? What do we need for that? Let's start with the immediate, most important, most iconic part of D&D, the dice. But let's not even go with just the dice. Let's go with the 20-sided dice. Let me tell you a story. The burnt city is shrouded in mystery. It lasted, we think, 1,000 years or more. But weirdly, the artifacts discovered from within this ancient city don't seem to match any of the cultures in the surrounding area. We know very little of why it collapsed, how it collapsed, or really about the people who lived there. It is truly a mystery that might never be solved. One thing we find there, dice. And look at these dice. They look exactly like modern dice. You couldn't tell the difference. But it's not just the burnt city that has these. We find bone dice up in Scotland from exactly around the same period. What period? 3000 BC. In other words, 5,000 years ago. But okay, these are dice that we can recognize as largely six-sided. What about the real prize? How long ago can we find a 20-sided dice? Here's a 20-sided dice from Egypt. The symbols on it are ancient Greek. There are loads of examples of these, with some from as early back as 200 BC. 20-sided dice are at least 2,000 years old. So storytelling, check. Dice, check. What else do you need for D&D? What about Battlemaps? Kriegspiel was a Prussian war game from the early 19th century. One of the earliest versions of the game had a battlefield constructed from a tabletop covered in damp sand that the player could then morph into a 3D representation of a battlefield. A few years later, this rather messy method was dramatically improved. The damp sand was swapped for new topographical maps developed by the Prussian military. But D&D doesn't need realistic battle maps. It needs maps that you yourself can invent. You don't need to have advanced cartography. You can just draw a hill and come up with various rules around it. And in fact, most D&D games that I've played have simply been on a grid we've drawn on paper. So how far back can we see things like this? Well, there's been board games for thousands of years, but if we look at this example, this is the ancient game of Ur. This game actually came in a box, a kind of 2-for-1 offer, which also included the game of Sinet. These are, I mean, look at them. They look like modern gaming sets you'd get for like car journeys or something like that. This example that you're looking at right now is from 1635 BC. This isn't even the oldest game board we have. Some examples go back over 4,000 years. It wasn't just the rich that played games like this either. Here's a hand-drawn version, which anyone could have done. Yes, this actual example was from a palace, but that's neither here nor there. Anyone could have drawn this and it could be done anywhere. Maps? Check. What about miniatures? Here's the Lewis chessmen. Look at the detail of these. They've got weapons, horses, clothes, armor, chairs, facial features. This is more detailed than most of the miniatures I've used in my games, which I don't know if that's good to admit or not, but this chess set comes from 1100 AD. That's 900 years ago. This isn't even the oldest chess set. That goes to the to this chess set from modern day Uzbekistan, complete with a lion riding queen. I mean, look at the detail of this. And when's this chess set from? 700 AD. This gives us at least 1300 years for D&D miniatures to have existed. And this, again, completely ignores the reality that you can use literally basically anything else for miniatures instead. You can use dice, you can use rocks, you can use food, you can use whatever you want. It really is not a limitation, no matter what Wizards of the Coast may want you to believe. Miniatures, check. What else could we possibly need for D&D to have existed in the past? What other technology is there that stands in the way and stops this thing from being invented until 1974? I guess the last thing must be, surely, recording the rules? So fine, how long ago could we have had any of the D&D rulebooks? The best example I can compare D&D to in terms of its complexity would be chess. Chess doesn't have complex rules, but it does have complex strategies. So let's try to compare D&D to the complex strategy manuals of chess. How far back do they go? In 900 AD, a group of Iranian scholars worked on a series of strategies for chess, some of which are still studied today. And if we go even further, there is the Emperor Wu in the province of Northern Zhao, who actually wrote a book on chess, perhaps the very first book on chess, in 569 AD. That puts complex rules for games, or at least complex strategies for games, around about 1,500 years ago. But if we're able to record complex narratives, I don't think it will be difficult to imagine that people could record rules for a game of storytelling involving dice. It isn't that much of a stretch. Why didn't it happen? So storytelling, check. Around for basically all of human history. Dice, check. Around for several thousand years, and D20s around for at least 2,000 years. Maps, check. Basically available for as long as humans can draw a grid out on the ground using a stick. Miniatures, really miniatures aren't even a block. You can use rocks or food or anything, check. And finally, rules. If we want to restrict ourselves to written rules for games, it's 1,500 years old. But if we want to open ourselves up to recording stories, it's again several thousand years old. The technology required for playing, making, inventing D&D or D&D-like games was around for at least 4,000 years before D&D was ever invented. This just doesn't make sense. It took 4,000 years to invent D&D. Why? This is the D&D problem. Why did it take so long to invent bicycles? We had wheels for thousands of years, we had metal, we had roads. Why did it take until the 19th century? But forget bike. Why did we have to wait until the 18th century to invent hot air balloons? China had paper lanterns, medievals had fabrics, they needed lookouts to warn about invasions of castles. Why didn't they have early hot air balloons? But forget that. Why were horses first domesticated in 4500 BC, but it took nearly 4,000 years to invent stirrups? And why, once they'd been invented in the Middle East, did it take a further 1,000 years or more for stirrups to finally be invented in Europe? But forget all of that. Why did it take until the 1970s for someone to add wheels to suitcases? And why do some people still not use them? The answer isn't anything about technology or culture or religion. The answer is simple but terrifying. For most people, most of the time, innovation just never occurs to them. It never occurs to make something new, improve on something, or even notice what might be possible. Think of what that means. We can go thousands of years with all the right technologies and just never realize what we could do with them, how we could combine them for something new. We don't reflect on what we can actually make possible. But this isn't even the thought that keeps me up at night. What keeps me up is how many things, how many incredible, life-changing, brilliant ideas, technologies, and inventions are we still missing? It took thousands of years to combine easy, cheap, available technologies to invent D&D. What are we missing now? What's right in front of us and none of us are seeing? If I could give you one thing from this, it's to look at the world in a different way than you did before you watched this. What has everyone else missed? What's possible and no one's noticed? I'm convinced we can stop the D&D problem. Each of us, we can do it. We just have to find out what we're missing, and you just need to know how to look. So start looking. Share this video with others, let them know, and maybe you or they will see something that everyone else has missed. There's a good chance you will. And when you do find that new thing or that new combination of things, try it, test it, build it.
Can I get my bike back?
Sorry, I'm music. It got me.